Caleb Martin had always taken pride in the little slice of paradise he called home. A sprawling custom-built ranch-style house nestled quietly at the edge of a suburban development, an oasis of freedom that had stood for 5 years as a testament to his hard work and meticulous craftsmanship. It sat just within the arbitrary boundary lines of a newly formed homeowners association, a bureaucratic monstrosity that had sprouted like an unwanted weed 2 years after he moved in, formed by a collection of overly ambitious neighbors who believed that power over others could be measured in the size of fines and the pettiness of complaints. Despite their assertions and printed newsletters, Caleb's property, grandfathered in, bought and built before the HOA's inception, was not legally beholden to their rules, their sensibilities, or their ridiculous demands, a fact that frustrated the HOA president Diane Ellison to no end. Diane, with her unnaturally tight blonde curls and clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand, treated the HOA like her personal kingdom and saw Caleb as a threat to her reign. His independence, his noncompliance, his clear disinterest in appeasing her every whim made her seethe with quiet fury. Over the years, she had lodged complaints about the height of his hedges, which stood at regulation height, the American flag he flew proudly from a 25-foot pole, which she called aesthetic pollution, the color of his mailbox, which was a handcrafted cedar box he made himself and which she said disrupted visual harmony, and even the wind chimes that hung from his front porch, calling them an auditory nuisance. Each complaint was met with calm, reasoned resistance, and occasionally legal proof that she had no authority over his land. Still, Diane pressed on, determined to bend Caleb to her will or drive him out altogether. On a warm Thursday afternoon, after returning from a 3-day hiking trip in the Appalachians, Caleb pulled into his long gravel driveway, exhausted but invigorated by nature, his SUV coated in a fine layer of mountain dust, his hiking gear packed tight in the back. He immediately noticed something was off. His usual routine, unlock the gate with a remote, pull up to his 3-car garage, and enter through the kitchen, was interrupted when the keypad next to the garage didn't light up at his touch. He frowned, thinking the battery might be dead, and walked to the front door. There, to his growing confusion and eventual rage, he found a metallic keypad lock, completely different from the biometric smart lock he had installed. In its place was a cheap, mechanical code lock system, one he certainly never approved, installed, or requested. His security camera above the door was hanging at an awkward angle, almost as if someone had intentionally repositioned or tampered with it. On the door, taped neatly with blue painter's tape, was a crisp notice printed on official-looking HOA letterhead. Notice of reclamation. Due to continuous non-compliance with HOA property appearance standards and community bylaws, and failure to address repeated citations, the HOA board has deemed it necessary to take administrative possession of the property at 304 Timberline Drive until further notice. Entry is prohibited. Caleb read it 3 times, his jaw slowly clenching tighter with each pass. The audacity, the illegality, the absolute insanity of what was happening began to settle into his gut like cold stone. He pulled out his phone and tried his front door cameras through the app. Offline. All of them. That shouldn't have been possible. He'd wired them into a backup power supply specifically for this kind of tampering. Someone had either cut power directly or hacked into his system. Fuming, Caleb tried the lock anyway. 6 digits he guessed from experience with cheap units like this. No go. He checked windows latched. Rear doors locked tight. He didn't want to break a window. Not yet. He needed to get in clean, collect evidence. That's when he remembered something Diane didn't know. The root cellar. When Caleb designed the house, he'd added a concealed storm cellar entrance behind his tool shed, a feature inspired by too many Midwestern tornado drills as a kid. He hustled down the gravel path, the rising tide of fury pushing him forward with sharp purpose. Behind the stacked woodpile and gardening tools was a flat stone slab he pushed aside to reveal the steel hatch. He twisted the lock wheel, felt it groan as it opened, and climbed down into the dim space, his flashlight guiding him past storage bins and emergency supplies. The access stairwell led up into his basement's utility closet. A few steps later, he was standing inside his own home, 10 degrees cooler than outside, dust dancing in the afternoon sunlight filtering through the basement window. He inhaled slowly, soaking in the scent of cedar and home, before heading upstairs. The first thing he did was boot up his security terminal, a console built into his office wall that monitored every camera, sensor, and motion alert on the property. Every feed was either disabled or jammed. That confirmed it. Someone had manually overridden his system. He navigated to the internal logs, which had been mirrored to a hidden backup server in his workshop. He smiled grimly when he saw the footage was still there. He watched in bitter disbelief as 3 uniformed maintenance men, wearing HOA badges, showed up 4 days ago with tools, ladders, and a contractor's truck. Diane herself arrived shortly after, stood at the sidewalk with her ever-present clipboard, and pointed at things while barking orders. The workers disabled his cameras, drilled out his front door lock, removed the biometric panel, and installed the ugly keypad system now in place. Then they entered, without a warrant, without authority, and most importantly, without his consent, and began photographing everything. It was nothing short of a home invasion. Caleb watched the footage 3 times, each viewing boiling his blood a little more. This wasn't just overreach. It was criminal. He immediately contacted his lawyer, Natalie Brinks, a sharp-tongued former litigator with a reputation for making people like Diane cry in court. As soon as Caleb explained, she launched into action, pulling public property records, filing for an emergency injunction, and drafting a cease and desist letter to be delivered the next morning. But even as Natalie prepared for legal war, Caleb couldn't sit still. He wasn't just angry. He was betrayed, violated in a way that made his skin crawl. This house had been his sanctuary, the first true home he'd built with his own hands after years of bouncing between military housing and base assignments. He had poured years into its design, from the open-concept kitchen with its double-island counter and walnut finishings, to the library nook tucked beneath the stairs with its wall-mounted bookcases and custom reading bench. Every corner of the house had meaning, and now it had been trespassed by people who saw it as just another box on a checklist of rule-breaking properties to crush beneath the HOA's iron-heeled boot. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He walked the halls, inspected every inch of his home, noted what was moved, touched, or disrupted. The guest bedroom closet had been opened, something inside rearranged. His garage storage bins had been shifted. One of his rifles in the basement gun safe had been handled. His inventory log confirmed its position was off. It was all too personal, too invasive. And yet Diane and her army of clipboard crusaders thought they could get away with this because they wore matching polos and held self-appointed titles. As the morning sun filtered over his lawn, Caleb stood on his porch with a hot cup of black coffee and stared at the keypad on his front door. His fingers itched with the urge to rip it off and hurl it into the woods. But no, that would come later. He had a better idea forming. One that would do more than fix the problem. One that would make a statement so powerful, so unmistakable, that no HOA board in the state would dare target him again. Not like this. At noon, after confirming with Natalie that the injunction was filed and a temporary restraining order against HOA entry was underway, Caleb made 3 phone calls. The first was to the sheriff's office, reporting unlawful entry and requesting an official police report. The second was to a local news tip line, anonymous, for now, regarding a homeowner's rights violation. The third, and most important, was to a man named Reggie Kimball. Reggie was an old Army buddy, now working as a private contractor specializing in high-security installations, vaults, bunkers, panic rooms. Caleb explained the situation in short, colorful terms. Reggie laughed once and said, "You want a vault door on your house? Man, you're crazier than I remember. I love it. I'll send you the catalog." By dinner, Caleb had picked the model, an 8-foot-tall, 12-inch thick, titanium-reinforced bank vault door with a biometric scanner, keypad override, and EMP shielding. The installation would take 4 days. And when it was done, no one, not Diane, not her clipboard commandos, not even a SWAT team, would ever get into Caleb's home without his say-so. As night fell again over Timberline Drive, Caleb sat in his living room, the footage of the HOA's invasion playing silently on loop on his flat screen. He wasn't scared. He wasn't unsure. He was determined. Diane had crossed the line, and she was about to find out that some people build their homes not just to live in, but to defend. Caleb sipped his bourbon slowly, leaned back into his leather chair, and whispered to the empty room, "You want to play games, Diane? Let's play." And with that, a plan was born. Not just to take back what was his, but to make a statement that would echo through HOA meetings, message boards, and neighborhood gossip for years to come. The HOA had started this war with locks and notices. Caleb would finish it with steel, fire, and one hell of a door. The sun hadn't yet crested the hilltops of Timberline Drive when Caleb Martin rose from bed the next morning, his mind already turning over a dozen ideas fueled by equal parts outrage and ingenuity, the kind of problem-solving energy that had made him a legend among his former Special Forces team and a quiet force of nature in civilian life. The events of the past 48 hours, the illegal lockout, the blatant trespassing, the smugness of Diane Ellison and her HOA lackeys, had ignited something in him that could not be soothed by a simple restraining order or a sternly worded lawsuit, although both were now well underway thanks to Natalie Brinks, who had immediately filed an emergency motion for injunctive relief and scheduled a preliminary hearing. Caleb had sent the sheriff's deputy a digital copy of the surveillance footage showing the HOA's hired goons drilling into his lock and trespassing through every corner of his home, and the deputy, to his credit, had not tried to downplay the severity of what he saw, promising an investigation and possibly even criminal charges. But Caleb wasn't content to wait for the slow gears of justice to turn. He wanted something immediate, visceral, and symbolic, something so unmissably defiant that it would render every future HOA attempt to interfere with his life utterly laughable. It was this desire that led him to sit at his drafting table in the early hours of that quiet Saturday morning, sketching the rough concept of a new front entrance that was part engineering marvel, part psychological warfare. His mind flashed back to his phone call with Reggie Kimball, the former combat engineer turned civilian contractor who now specialized in bank vaults, secure facilities, and luxury panic rooms for the paranoid ultra-wealthy. Reggie had served with Caleb in the Middle East, where they'd built hardened shelters under enemy fire and converted civilian infrastructure into safe havens during active combat zones. If there was anyone who understood the value of a good door, and the statement a great one could make, it was Reggie. When Caleb had described what the HOA had done, Reggie's booming laugh had echoed over the speaker. "You want to turn your front porch into Fort Knox? Hell yeah. Let's make it happen." Reggie had emailed Caleb a classified spec sheet within the hour, a catalog of vault doors that looked like they belonged in central banks, not suburban neighborhoods. Caleb had scanned the options with growing excitement before settling on the Prowler VX 9000, a 12-inch thick, triple-sealed, biometric-locked bank vault door made from layered titanium steel alloy, equipped with a redundant keypad, a physical locking wheel, and an optional retinal scanner. It weighed nearly 2,500 pounds and came with its own reinforced frame assembly that would require part of the front wall to be removed and rebuilt. Reggie called it the Rolls-Royce of paranoia. Caleb called it the perfect answer to Diane's little lock stunt. Reggie arrived the next day in a matte black truck with 3 subcontractors, all wearing tactical contractor gear and sunglasses that made them look like a private military outfit rather than a construction crew. The neighbors immediately took notice. By noon, half the street had peeked out through blinds, stared from porches, or casually wandered by with dogs and strollers pretending to take an innocent interest in the unusually heavy-duty operation. The men measured, marked, and began the demolition of the front facade. The existing front door, a classic mahogany with sidelights and a transom window, was removed entirely, along with the surrounding frame and 2 feet of wall on each side. Reinforced concrete footings were poured to support the additional weight, steel beams were set, and by day 3, a recessed vestibule was taking shape, designed to house the massive vault door like a crown jewel in an armored setting. The entire front of the house now resembled the entrance to a secret government bunker, with an overhanging canopy, LED lighting strips, and reinforced steps. Caleb watched the construction with arms folded, occasionally sipping coffee or giving quiet nods of approval. Reggie kept the crew moving with military precision, barking measurements, calling for torque specs, and ensuring every anchor was rated for blast resistance. By the time the actual vault door was delivered, cradled on a flatbed truck under a heavy tarp, the crowd across the street had grown to include nearly a dozen onlookers, including teenagers filming with their phones, middle-aged men whispering in amazement, and a very stiff-looking Diane standing next to her vice president, Martin Kellerman, both of them wearing matching HOA polos and forced smiles that didn't quite hide the brewing panic in their eyes. Diane approached Caleb once during the installation, her tone clipped and performative. "Mr. Martin," she began, her voice tight like a rubber band stretched too far. "We've received several complaints from other residents about excessive noise and unsightly construction." Caleb didn't even look up from the schematics he was reviewing. "Then they can invest in better earplugs," he replied evenly, turning the page and making a note in the margin. "This is not compliant with HOA architectural standards," she continued, her voice rising slightly. Caleb slowly raised his eyes and met hers with a look so calm, so unwavering, it sent a chill through her spine. "You mean the same standards that don't apply to my property because I'm not subject to your association? Or the ones you violated when you illegally entered my home?" Diane faltered, her jaw working silently for a moment before she spun on her heel and stormed off, her cheeks flushed and clipboard trembling in her grip. That was the last time she came close to the site. The rest of the board steered clear entirely. Caleb didn't care if they called in reinforcements. He had permits, documentation, and Natalie's legal team on speed dial. Everything was above board. Every bolt was legal. Every insult was intentional. By day 4, the Prowler VX 9000 was in place. The installation team took a full 8 hours to seat the door into the frame, align the biometric scanners, run diagnostic tests, and integrate it with Caleb's existing smart home system. When the final test was complete, Reggie gathered the crew in the front yard for a ceremonial moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with mock gravity, "I give you the most HOA-proof entrance in the state of Virginia." With a dramatic flourish, he pressed his thumb to the scanner, entered a code, and turned the wheel. The door opened with a hiss of pressurized air, revealing the softly lit vestibule and the interior foyer beyond. The crowd watching from across the street let out a collective gasp. One teenager actually clapped. Diane had vanished, presumably back to the HOA clubhouse to hyperventilate into a cup of chamomile tea. Caleb shook Reggie's hand firmly. "It's perfect," he said simply. "I want that HOA to look at this door every time they pass and remember exactly who they're dealing with." Reggie grinned. "Oh, they'll remember. This thing could stop a tank. Or a lawsuit." As the crew packed up and left, Caleb stood on his new porch, looking out over the stunned, silent neighborhood. It was done, and it was glorious. But Caleb wasn't finished. The door was just the beginning. He installed a custom doorbell camera with a directional microphone that automatically announced, in a warm but sarcastic tone, "You are now speaking to the fortified residence of a private citizen. Unauthorized entry will be recorded and prosecuted. Have a nice day." He updated the internal alarm system to include a fake bank vault sound effect whenever someone approached the front steps. His mailbox was upgraded to a steel drop box with a magnetic lock and a warning sticker that read, "Tampering with federal property is a felony." He added decorative floodlights that cast dramatic shadows over the vault door at night, making it look like the entrance to a top-secret military installation. Caleb even installed 2 gnome statues on the front lawn, each with a tiny camera in its eye and a small speaker inside its hat that played a faint ticking noise whenever Diane walked by. It wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was about owning the narrative, about turning every HOA member's casual stroll past his house into a moment of uncertainty and regret. Diane had tried to make him an example. Caleb had returned the favor. Meanwhile, Natalie kept him updated on the legal side. The judge had approved the injunction, and a hearing date was set. The footage had been submitted into evidence, and the sheriff's office had opened an investigation into criminal trespass and property tampering. Diane and her board had begun scrambling, hiring a defense attorney and attempting to blame the contractors for misinterpreting instructions. But the paper trail was clear. Diane had signed off on the operation. The contractors were paid directly from the HOA's emergency fund. There was even an email from Diane to the board titled, "Neutralizing the Martin Problem," that Natalie couldn't wait to present in court. Caleb wasn't surprised. He had known people like Diane all his life, people who mistook authority for power and bureaucracy for justice. But what she failed to understand was that Caleb hadn't just prepared for war. He'd made a career out of it. She had walked onto his battlefield armed with rules and forms. He responded with strategy, steel, and spectacle. As the week came to a close, the neighborhood was abuzz. People whispered at cookouts and neighborhood meetings. Rumors spread that Caleb was hiding gold behind the door, or that he had a weapons cache, or that he was some sort of government spook in retirement. Caleb didn't correct them. The myth served him better than the truth. One evening, a group of kids on bikes stopped in front of his house, staring in awe. One of them called out, "Mister, what's behind the vault?" Caleb smiled and replied, "Everything worth protecting." The kids laughed nervously and pedaled away, and Caleb returned to his porch, bourbon in hand, watching the last rays of sun glint off the polished steel of his indomitable new door. It wasn't just about security. It was about sovereignty, about making it unmistakably clear that his home, his life, and his rights were not up for debate, negotiation, or committee review. The HOA had tried to make Caleb a villain. They had painted him as the rogue homeowner, the outlier, the threat to their carefully curated aesthetic order. But in trying to suppress him, they had created a symbol. And that vault door wasn't just a barrier. It was a monument to defiance, a declaration in metal and code that said, "I will not be controlled." And if Diane thought this was the end, she was sorely mistaken. Caleb wasn't done, not by a long shot. He had plans. He had allies. And most importantly, he had time. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. And now, every step the HOA took would echo against the unbreakable wall of the one man they should never have underestimated. The man with the bank vault door. Diane Ellison's carefully cultivated world began to unravel not with a bang, but with the precise clicking of legal gears turning against her as Caleb Martin's counterattack unfolded like a masterclass in psychological, social, and legal warfare, executed with the poise of a seasoned strategist who had spent years outmaneuvering people with far more firepower than a suburban HOA president. By the Monday following the installation of Caleb's Prowler VX 9000 vault door, Diane had already filed a series of complaints with the HOA's compliance committee, citing excessive construction, disruptive security features, and the now infamous visual blight of militaristic decor, only to be met with absolute silence from the city's municipal offices and passive disinterest from her own board members, who had begun privately expressing doubt about her leadership ever since Caleb's. Surveillance footage began circulating among the community. That footage, time-stamped, clear, and damning, showed two HOA-hired contractors forcibly entering Caleb's home, taking photos of his property, inspecting his electronics, and even rifling through a few of his private documents before one of them turned to the camera, realizing far too late they were being recorded. It was a public relations disaster that not even Diane's polished rhetoric could cover up, and Caleb had wisely taken advantage of the digital age by uploading the entire clip, edited only for security clarity, to a popular neighborhood drama subreddit titled HOA Nightmares. Within 24 hours, the video had accumulated 1.6 million views, made the front page of Reddit, and even got picked up by local news outlets as an example of HOA overreach and private citizen resistance, with headlines such as "Virginia man defends home with bank vault door after illegal lockout," and "HOA goes too far, gets burned by veteran homeowner with a plan." His life, not the life of a revolutionary, not a man consumed by vengeance, but someone who had reclaimed something most people don't even realize they've lost: control over his own narrative. The vault door, for all its drama and viral fame, was never the point. It was the line in the sand, the last wall that said, "No farther." And when that line held, it changed everything. The Timberline neighborhood, once notorious for its rigid HOA policies and surveillance culture, was now being quietly celebrated as a case study in restorative community dynamics. A local university even approached the board for permission to write a sociology thesis on the vault door rebellion, though Caleb declined to participate, preferring his privacy over further attention. Still, the thesis was written, titled Fort Martin and the Rise of Suburban Sovereignty, and it made the rounds in certain academic circles. Meanwhile, Diane Ellison faded into obscurity. Rumors swirled. Some said she moved to Florida, others that she joined a different HOA under a different name. But it didn't matter. In Timberline, she was a cautionary tale now, a ghost of governance past, her story buried under the renewed laughter of block parties and potlucks, of neighbors once again talking to each other instead of whispering behind closed doors. As spring gave way to summer, and garden gnomes wearing tiny spyglasses continued to appear on front lawns as a kind of neighborhood in-joke, Caleb remained steady. Always kind, always composed, but never less than what he had proven himself to be. A man willing to stand his ground not for glory, but because he knew that sometimes the smallest patch of land, the most modest home, is sacred if it's yours. And defending that, he had shown, was never overreacting. It was living deliberately. He never removed the vault door, because he never needed to. His home became the setting for stories, urban myths even. Children whispered that there was treasure behind the vault, perhaps gold or secret government documents, or even a tunnel to an underground lair. Parents chuckled at the rumors but didn't discourage them. Caleb leaned into it with playful subtlety. One Halloween, he placed flickering LED lights behind the vault, synchronized to emit a low, echoing hum. The kids screamed with delight and dared each other to knock. "The vault guardian will only open it for those with pure hearts," he told one group, handing out full-sized candy bars. The legend grew. A local artist even painted a small mural of the vault on a community wall, capturing its presence like a medieval castle door among pastel townhouses. Caleb allowed it without condition so long as the plaque read, "Stand your ground." Even here, and it did. His quiet charisma, measured approach, and sincere commitment to his rights without stepping on others had begun to reshape the very soul of Timberline. Where once fear had ruled, now a kind of measured respect bloomed. And through all of this, Caleb never changed his routine much. Still up at dawn, coffee brewing strong, walks with his Shepherd mix Ranger through the now less pristine but far more lived-in streets, friendly nods to passing joggers and a few lingering double-takes from those who remembered the vault guy. He smiled through them all, not because he needed the recognition, but because he knew what it meant. They remembered, and in that remembrance lay accountability. The HOA would never again be able to overreach in the shadows, never again able to exploit silence or compliance. He had set a precedent not just in Timberline, but in how suburban America understood property, privacy, and power. The HOA even rebranded its charter language to include what it dubbed the Martin Clause, a firm line in the bylaws preventing board members from accessing private property without due legal process or emergency justification. Diane's era was officially over. At one meeting, the clause was read aloud, and when a young homeowner asked who it was named after, an older resident simply said, "He's the guy who built a bank vault around his front door." The room chuckled in unison. What struck Caleb most, however, wasn't the fame or the policy change or even the satisfaction of watching his opponents fall. It was the way silence had returned to his life, the good kind, the kind that fills the air between wind chimes and cricket songs, the quiet that lingers after justice is done. He didn't crave noise. He had seen enough of it, verbal attacks, power grabs, HOA intimidation tactics cloaked in bureaucratic language. What he wanted, and now had, was stability. The freedom to read a book on his porch without worrying that someone would cite him for a lawn chair color. The ability to take a weekend trip and return without fearing his locks would be changed again. The bank vault door remained, not because he needed it now, but because it told a story, one of defiance, of preparation, of refusing to be bullied. And while he had no intention of living behind fear, the door served as a permanent reminder that boundaries must sometimes be built in steel. Over time, the vault door itself gained almost folkloric status. Strangers who heard the story online made pilgrimages, including veterans, libertarians, homeowners from other HOA war zones, and even a class of architecture students who emailed Caleb asking if they could study the design. He declined the interview but gave them permission to photograph it from the sidewalk, along with a single quote, "This door didn't keep people out. It kept my dignity in." That quote went viral, posted to design blogs, political forums, and even a mental health subreddit about establishing boundaries. Caleb never commented on the posts, never replied to the viral tweets. He simply kept living. He tended his backyard, taught Ranger new tricks, baked sourdough with his neighbor's teenage son, and mentored a few young veterans in the area, offering his garage as a workshop for fixing bikes and building furniture. People began calling him the Vault, not as a joke, but as a term of endearment, a title earned not through bravado but resolve. And somewhere not far from Timberline, Diane read all of it, saw the articles, the photos, the memes, the neighborhood pride, the vault jokes, the legal reform, the community gratitude, and in the silence of her modest townhome, she stewed. She had hoped Caleb would eventually slip up, that he'd reveal a flaw, break a rule, or fall victim to his own stubbornness. But he hadn't. He'd played it clean, quiet, and smart. Her clipboard, once the symbol of her dominance, now lay forgotten in a drawer, collecting dust and paper clips. No one remembered her monthly reports or beautification quotas. They remembered the vault, and the man behind it. Diane's story had ended the moment she turned that key in Caleb's lock and thought herself invincible. Caleb's story had only begun the moment he turned his back on that same door and decided never again. Now, as evening fell across Timberline and porch lights flickered on in a quiet, slow wave, Caleb stood inside his living room sipping chamomile tea, the metallic silhouette of the vault door casting a long shadow against the far wall. It was quiet, peaceful. His phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. Community barbecue next weekend. You in? He replied. Wouldn't miss it. Then he placed his phone down, pet Ranger's head, and looked out at the dust-colored street, where freedom no longer felt like a word printed in small font on legal paper, but something tangible, heavy as steel, calm as silence, earned in full. He didn't need revenge. He had resolution. He didn't need fame. He had peace. He didn't need to watch the door anymore. It watched for him.